Jessica, did you want to start us off and talk about this super awesome topic that you came up with for today's presentation?
Sure. Hi. So welcome everybody to Wellness in Your House, New Year, More Me, which is stepping out of self-criticism and into more embodied self-worth. We'll start off with a territorial acknowledgement today.
All right. So thank you everyone for joining us. As we know, territorial acknowledgements are sacred practice and a really integral step in moving forward in creating safe spaces. So Jessica and I wanted to invite everybody to just take a moment to reflect on what it means for you to be on this land. So yeah, thank you. We would like to humbly acknowledge that we work, live, love, and learn on the traditional lands of the Tk'emlúps to Secwépemc within Secwepemcúlecw, the traditional and unceded territory of the Secwepemc peoples. The TRU Wellness Center is committed to working towards decolonization within our services, as well as the individual lives of our team members. So please feel free to unmute yourself and honor your own territory, or if you're from somewhere else, or pop it into the chat. And Jessica, I don't know if you want to speak to some ways that you're practicing decolonization, and then I can follow.
Yeah, I think one way that I'm trying to practice decolonization is really understand the meaning and value of territorial acknowledgements, and just really always acknowledging and appreciating my presence on this land, and trying to value the land and respect it the best I can. I think is probably one way I'm trying to do that. So.
Yeah, I would say that definitely resonates with me. I think just being aware of like the beauty of the land and appreciating it, and just really reflecting that we can, be on this land for, many complex reasons. But a great one is that people have protected and taken care of this land for a really long time. And I think another way for myself is, working more towards understanding territorial acknowledgements and their significance, and doing my best to research where I can on Indigenous related issues. And yeah.
I don't know if there's anything in the chat or if anyone else has any ideas of ways to practice decolonization they wanted to share.
There's nothing in the chat, but.
Can I just share a comment too?
Yeah.
So this is Chelsea. Hello, everyone. I'm just thinking too around with decolonization. It's also really important to think about the area and the people, Indigenous community that we're a part of. What I've been learning is that it's also important to hear Indigenous voices, but it's also important to hear the Indigenous voices of the people tied to the land that we're currently on. And that's kind of new learning for me. It's I did the Sanya's cultural competency course a couple years ago, I guess, a year and a half ago, and it talked about, like, in BC, there's over 200 Indigenous languages that are spoken in our province alone. And so learning about that not all Indigenous peoples or cultures or peoples have exactly the same cultural practices. And sorry, there's my microwave. But it's also important to learn. So when we're talking about Tk'emlúps to Secwepemc, it's very important that we also speak with members of that local nation to get their perspectives in decolonizing as well, because of the land that we occupy. So my long-winded thought, but it's something that's kind of been new for me in the last little bit. And I'm grateful for that learning as well.
Right on. Thank you for sharing, Chelsea.
Okay, so we're today's team. I'm Jessica, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers.
And I am Dakara, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers.
So this is just a little brief overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be discussing New Year's resolutions and the resolution trap, as well as resolution burnout. A little bit of a history in what New Year's resolutions are, self-criticism versus self-compassion, and how that ties in as a role. The New Year, More Me philosophy. We're going to talk a bit about that and how that can be used to kind of embody more holistic self-worth and well-being. A little poem that I love on this topic that's called "This Is Not My Year to Run a Marathon." We're going to discuss some alternatives moving forward. So the setting packed goals rather than SMART goals, as well as the five to thrive. Sorry, we're gonna give you some supportive resources, and then we're gonna wrap up things that we unpacked together today. I did also just want to make a note that these 3 resources here on the bottom of this slide are on every slide. And if you're finding that you might need a little bit more support, if something's coming up for you, you don't feel comfortable speaking up or popping it into the chat, you're more than welcome to reach out to any of these resources at any time during the presentation. Also, instructions to access our live chat that just recently launched, where you can chat with a wellness ambassador live. Links to that are on this TRU Wellness Center, which I just spotted a typo, I'm sorry. But TRU Wellness Center on Facebook and Instagram. You can find instructions on how to access that there. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Jessica.
Also, for accessibility, if you wanted to have subtitles on, at the very top of the Microsoft Teams presentation on your screen, you should see 3 little dots that give you more actions, and you can just click on turn captioning on. We'll give you subtitles of everything that's being said. Okay, so the resolution trap. New Year's resolutions are a really common tradition in society for a lot of people. It's kind of that thing, and one of the ways that we typically will ring in a new year, and they can be a really positive thing, but sometimes there's quite a bit of pressure that comes with New Year's resolutions, right? We tend to come even sometimes early December before Christmas is even past us. We start getting bombarded by all of these messages from different forms of media. Some common ones are changing our body sizes and diets, right? The fitness industry, really big into that. Skill sets, so learning new skills, learning new tools, whatever that may be. Changing your mood and attitude, of migrating towards like a constant, overly positive, always happy kind of a frame. Relationship statuses, bank accounts, GPAs, credentials, environments, personalities, and ultimately just change our entire selves and lives. And this pressure often contributes to a feeling of not being enough exactly as we are, and especially if we stray from the path of those resolutions that are usually pretty strictly set. So it's a bit of a trap that a lot of us fall into. I know I have, and yeah, so we're going to be talking about that today and a few solutions on how to kind of bounce back from if you find yourself being caught in that. So,
and I think to, what Jessica spoke to, I think can generally really translate to any kind of change engaged thinking that we get into. Like, I mean, we can apply these things that we learned today, not just to that resolution, New Year, January, really change focus time. But I think a lot of these are good skill sets moving forward into treating yourself with self-compassion anytime that you want to integrate change into your life or make a difference.
Yeah, totally. Okay.
All right, so we're going to start talking about the resolution burnout. So we'll start off by talking about what the term burnout actually means. If anybody wants to pop into the chat, has anybody heard or not familiar with the term burnout? You can just put like a yes or a no. Super simple. Cool. And it has, yeah. All right, so burnout. So burnout is this state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion. It's more than just being tired. It's a sense of that burns out and really translates to a lot of different parts of ourselves, that emotional, mental, spiritual, physical. So burnout is caused by long-term and unmanageable stress. And it can cause individuals to lose interest and motivation to move forward. And it's really like, yeah, it just kind of dims out your light is how I would describe feeling of being burnt out. So in relation to resolutions, what is resolution burnout? So resolution burnout is the aftermath of a really self-critical dialogue that's occurring within us, often when we're engaging in resolutions and maybe not making those. And that fuels our efforts to full force jump into these resolutions, and maybe to a point where we're working beyond our means and our personal resources to stick to that path of our resolutions. So it also may be the result of working towards resolutions that aren't exactly aligned with our truth or our values, or within the realm to achieve those resolutions. But resolutions, as we're going to learn today, should not burn you out. Resolutions and goals are meant to lift us up and not pull us down. They're meant to kind of maybe pinpoint some parts of our lives that we want to show more kindness to, but often that's not the way that we receive them. So if our resolutions and goals are causing us to experience burnout, then it's time to reassess those goals.
Yeah, and I think too, just to add to that with burnout and resolution burnout, it's kind of, it's not always just the long-term and unmanageable amounts of stress. Sometimes it can be, if we haven't necessarily been keeping with our wellness and managing our wellness, and all of a sudden we make all of these radical changes when we're not necessarily in the best place, or we have a lot of inner narratives tied to these changes, and we just start going full force without kind of preparing ourselves, whether it be mentally, physically, that can initiate burnout really quickly. It's not always just like it's been a long time coming. So whether you've been doing something long term and it's kind of unmanageable and starting to wear at you and you're starting to feel that burnout, or if it's not really been, it's just kind of suddenly crept up on you, both are valid, and there's stuff we can do about both to kind of bounce back. So yeah.
So now I'm going to go into a super brief history lesson, because I think a lot of traditions and ceremonies and things that we do in society, such as a resolution, is pretty normalized, and often we don't always know the origin or the root of that. And I think sometimes when something like a resolution has maybe been turned into, a marketing thing or a pressured thing or a thing that doesn't make us feel very empowered, I think a great way of taking back that power and empowering ourselves is learning where it comes from. And I think that, it really helps us reclaim that power and not put so much weight to it. So we're going to start off with the term resolution. So the origin of the term resolution was formed out of many kind of different intersecting concepts in Latin. So resolution is from the Latin term solvere, which translates to loosen, release, and explain. And that's original meaning was breaking into parts, and this remained as it's a sense of communicating, solving a problem. So essentially resolution in its very early days translates to solving a problem. So when we break down the many roots of this word, this concept translates to solution to a conflict. And as we know, language is really powerful. It's how many of us make sense of and form these ideas that affect our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors. So as we make resolutions and, hold so much power to this concept and this word, I think it's really important that we remind ourselves that we are not a problem to be solved, right? Resolution may not actually be always in its, very origin meaning, the most appropriate pressure to put on ourselves as individuals, right?
Do you want the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so the next one is of New Year's resolutions. So in a lot of my presentations, I always like to throw a little razzle dazzle of that political piece in there. So I thought it would be really interesting to talk about where this actually came from. So the origin of New Year's resolutions were actually rooted in economic growth, which I think we really see that today with a lot of the kind of capitalist tactics to market new things. So the first New Year's resolutions were created by the ancient Babylonians at the beginning of their planting season. So during this time, citizens would promise both their gods and one another to work hard and pay off their debts. And this was motivated by boosting the economy. So their government bodies at the time really enforced this concept because a better growing season plus less money owned equaled more capital for the government. So New Year's resolutions have been about exploiting this myth that of self-improvement into pressuring individuals to carry unrealistic weight of economic and social burdens within society. And I think a lot of the times we might feel that, like when we engage in resolutions, we kind of feel this weight to fit a certain standard that's maybe been fed to us or that we have come to learn. But really, it's, that's a social piece that's really been, influencing us for a long time, and we just kind of learn to accept it. So individuals were expected to work harder, pay more, and feel responsible for things like the economy, which would inherently take the pressure off the government bodies. So I don't know if Jessica, if you have any comments that you want to say about that connection and kind of how that's evolved to now.
Yeah, I think that that's kind of the area where we do see that is there are a lot of things that, like we talked about at the beginning of this presentation, where the media kind of places a lot of pressure and reinforces that pressure, like feeding off certain areas where people may commonly, through research or other means of self-reporting, express that they're kind of feeling some insecurity in certain areas, whether like the fitness and diet industry or like relationship sectors or financial sectors.
I think a really, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think a really big one that we actually see too is like the pressure that individuals get put on for things like climate change. I mean, it's super wonderful that we can all do our part and make changes towards, helping our environment. But still, that puts a little bit too much of the pressure off larger bodies that are maybe contributing more harm with their power, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
All right, so the last brief history lesson is just the capitalization of insecurity, which really kind of ties the two pieces together and how that might relate to resolutions. So corporations historically and currently, they capitalize off of insecurities and they often create them. Marketing promotes unrealistic, unhealthy, generalized, and impulsible standards. And this marketing has a really huge influence on individuals and, social attitudes that we deem normal in society. And this media tactic is not new. So this comes from a really patriarchal and capitalist agenda where they utilize mass media to enforce a term, and sorry, this is a term that I had to Google when I heard it, but systemic indoctrination, which is essentially brainwashing. So it's utilizing the media to kind of brainwash individuals that these are the standards that you have to meet in order to be good or to be perfect or to be up to par. So this tactic aims to take away the power from individuals. And Naomi Wolf, who's an incredible feminist author of The Beauty Myth, refers to these standards as a culture conspiracy. And so the last part here I have is resistance to the system. So this pressure that we often get put on ourselves, it's become so insidious that we see it as normal, but it's totally not. And that's what we're going to really dive into more. And Jessica's going to speak a lot too, moving away from that self-criticism and into that self-compassion piece, because we don't have to subscribe to these standards. And I think it's important to tie in this history piece and kind of look at the political side of it, because learning about and recognizing these systems of oppression and how they can affect us and influence us is a way of resisting them. And it's a way of empowering ourselves. So I think that's all I have to say about that, Jessica.
Just really quick before we move on, though, a lot of us do know, but there are some, and maybe some who might view the recording later, who might not be entirely sure what we mean with patriarchy. So I'm just wondering if you'd be able to kind of give our viewers a little bit of like a insight to what we mean when we say that it's a patriarchal and capitalist agenda.
For sure. I'm probably going to fumble over this because as much as I use this term and I learned through this term, I feel like it's so hard to give it like a definition. But the patriarchy is essentially a greater system. It's a political system, and it is motivated by sexism and gender inequality. So the patriarchy really, on their agenda, tries to maintain a status quo that essentially benefits the needs of like cis heterosexual men. So I don't know if Chelsea wants to jump in or if Jessica wants to add a little bit more to that. But the patriarchy, it shows itself up in a lot of ways in our culture.
Yeah, I think that's, I don't think that was fumbling. I think you did great.
Okay. Cool.
I think when we think patriarchy, for me personally, like that's typically, what would come to mind. And I think it's important when we talk patriarchy that it does show up in so many ways, and that there's more to it than what meets the eye in a lot of ways, and that there are certain populations that I think the goal of patriarchy is, like you said, to kind of like maintain an unease and like an off balance, and like really in relation to what we're covering today, that like sense of being not enough or being too much. And I think that typically when we think patriarchy, we think of women, being kind of repressed, or certain minority groups maybe being really repressed. But I think that it's important to acknowledge that it can really affect anyone in a lot of ways. So, yeah, I don't know if Chelsea did have any comments or if you're good, but
all I was going to say is you both did a great job. It's really around that power imbalance, right? Between, like, I think you said, like, Takara, that cisgendered white male in systems, right? So like we see it at the, like you can see that at the individual level, but also at the big organizational systems levels. And it has a huge impact on people's wellness. And so I think you both did a great job.
Thank you. Okay. All right.
Oops. Whoops. There we go.
So after just kind of talking a bit about the history piece, I'll read this after, but I really want to acknowledge that resolutions aren't inherently a bad thing. And I think goal setting and making changes can be an incredibly beautiful process. But I just think that we need to reassess when it's affecting us in a negative way or making us question our self-worth. And I think that's, resolutions are such an ingrained thing, and change is such an ingrained thing in our society. So I think the healthiest way we can do is just shifting our approach to it. And I think having that knowledge of maybe some of the negative ways it affects us and why is an important foundation. And then in steps moving forward, we can really work on changing how we approach it. So to many, the new year can represent a symbolic time of new beginnings and fresh starts. The energy of this time of year can instill us with tons of energy and inspiration to embark on new journeys and integrate new habits into our lives, or kick old habits. And I just think it's important that when we engage in this kind of manifesting change mindset, that we reflect on what are our motivations, and if the changes that we want to incorporate are grounded in self-compassion and self-prioritization. So really thinking if what we're doing is an act of kindness and love to ourselves, and also in terms of self-prioritization, if it's what we really want or if it's just what we're told that we should be. So we want to move away from that new year, new me mindset and shift towards new year, more me mindset, which Jessica's going to talk about later. So yeah, thank you.
All right. So self-criticism disguised as self-discipline. So that's kind of like a common thread in many resolutions or in many goals in general, is like the self-discipline of making it happen. And when we're pushing ourselves often beyond our means, if we're, our human experience kind of ebbs and flows from day to day, and our needs to meet our different levels of wellness will change and ebb and flow with those day to day. And so when we're pushing ourselves beyond what we might be able to, accomplish in a day or something, then that's really an opportunity for our inner critic to kind of start running the show and presenting itself. And self-criticism shows up in many different ways. And it can say many things, but like the primary message is, like we talked about, that you're not enough or you're too much. And it'll often have us, as a result, doing too much or not enough at the same time. So doing too much, striving for a goal, and in the process, we end up doing not enough self-care or not enough of those basics to maintain our wellness. And then our inner dialogue can get kind of nasty and harsh, right? We start having some like negative self-talk or self-feeding attitudes, and just start feeling really low, worn out, burnt out, right? And many people kind of praise that because it's so easily disguised in society as self-discipline, which is kind of like the shiny gold medal that our society holds and gives to people who kind of dismiss their needs in order to achieve and be successful. And that's something that we're really trying to change. And some myths, I put some myths about self-criticism, which is that it helps us stay productive. It prevents us from letting ourselves go or being lazy. It's the only way that we'll ever get to where we want to be. And if we listen to that inner dialogue from our inner critic long enough, then we might even start believing that we don't deserve self-compassion. So it can be a really damaging thing, and it's pretty well disguised in society today. So, yeah. And the opposite of this is self-compassion. Self-compassion can help us reframe that inner critic, right? It allows us to give ourselves a break, appreciate ourselves, honor our needs, and practice self-care, which is really important when implementing any kind of change, big or small. And it can also be like a huge help in maintaining and achieving and working towards resolutions, right? Because when we honor our needs and when we're managing our wellness, we're in a better position to show up fully. And usually it can help with things like productivity and all of that. So it can feel really uncomfortable and awkward, self-compassion, if if it's a new concept for you, or if you've been buying into the inner critic for so long and trying to be self-disciplined, then it can feel kind of uncomfortable. But a great way to start practicing self-compassion is if you just are able to stop and kind of notice those negative thoughts, those self-critical thoughts when they're coming in, and then just try and respond. Like if you were to imagine your best friend beside you talking to themselves that way, and respond to yourself how you would a best friend or a loved one. So I don't know, Takara, if you have any other ideas on like what would be a good way to first start practicing self-compassion, or any tips that you found useful.
Yeah, I think the best friend one is such a good example, Jessica, and I think you said that really beautifully too, because I think it's so easy to be hard on ourselves, and we get this tunnel vision. We're stuck inside our minds, and I know that I would never speak the way about a loved one or see a friend as critically as I do myself. So I think it's a really great comparison to make. I think that's stepping outside of your own and just remembering how we treat others and reminding ourselves to treat ourselves that way. And on the topic of self-compassion, I think I'd like to invite everybody to just take a minute and type in the chat maybe one way that when you're feeling your inner critic, that you treat yourself with self-compassion. So I'll just give a minute for everybody to reflect on that and maybe add something, because I'd love to hear.
Do we have any ideas coming? All
right, there we go. Okay, cool. All at once. So Chelsea said, remind myself that I am human and I'm not perfect. Good learning comes from mistakes, even though there's a lot of discomfort at the time. So I think that's a really great one. I actually, it's a skill that I do. So when I'm feeling like I'm having a panic attack or feeling really self-critical and anxious, I actually go back to maybe some of the more uncomfortable moments of my life and remember that I lived past those. So I think that's a really great skill. And then Hannah wrote, I often have to tell myself that the negative self-talk isn't serving me in any way, so I change that mindset. Yeah, I think that's a really good one too. Navisha said, my favorite one is where I tell myself, this is really hard or this really hurts, and then I ask myself, may I be kind to myself? That's really beautiful, Navisha. Noah said, when facing a struggle, remembering that I've overcame greater struggles in the past and I'm capable of moving forward. Yeah. So I think that's honoring that resilience that we have and almost sometimes that lack of control that we might have in our life course where bad things are going to happen and we have this incredible power as humans to resist and persist past that. Olivia said, 3 deep breaths, and then my go-to is I am worth everything great. These are really awesome. Thank you, everybody, so much for sharing these.
Yeah, those are some really great ones. And just as a fun fact on here, there is some public access research and modules if you wanted to try to start practicing self-compassion. It's from the Center for Clinical Interventions. And so they did quite a bit of research when they were establishing their modules for self-compassion. And because so many people hold such strong myths about self-criticism, they did a little experiment. We'll talk more about how experiments can be valuable later on. But so there was 1 week where you practiced your normal self-critical self. And then the following week, you'd intentionally, to the best of your ability, practice self-compassion. And so some of those myths around like, well, my self-criticism helps keep me driven and productive and all of those things. They found that in 97% of cases, all of those were actually proven wrong. And people were more motivated and productive and felt less stress and more manageability on the days where they intentionally practiced at least one form of self-compassion. So little differences do go a long way.
I love that. That's awesome. Thanks for adding that.
Yeah, very cool. So here we are now at the New Year, More Me philosophy. So New Year, More Me, it was an idea that was kind of crafted by Dr. Danielle McGinnis, who is amazing and a depth psychologist and embodiment coach. She's actually my coach. And so it's kind of a mantra as a sort of pushback towards the typical New Year's resolution structure that we see, right? Like we mentioned earlier, it does kind of operate on you're not good enough, so you should totally recraft yourself with New Year, New Me, which does send the message that we have to be new in some or all ways in order to be enough today. And really, so it's all about like embodying your true self and showing up fully as yourself rather than joining the race for perfection and that self-discipline that we talked about earlier. So instead of changing ourselves, it's showing up authentically. And so some questions for contemplation when we're setting goals or resolutions that align with the New Year, More Me mindset is, does this align with my true values? And does it serve my highest good? Why do I feel this is important? Is there some sense of pressure I feel to change this aspect of myself? And where is that coming from? And what's the inner narrative I have when working towards this? So to use an example, I'll practice an example. So for a long time, I could be I noticed a lot of like harsh self-criticism with my grades and my GPA. And so I had to kind of sit and contemplate a little bit why it was important to me, all of those things. And so, does this align with my true values and serve my highest good? So I kind of looked at like the things I would do and the lengths I was going to and the things that I was eliminating that were wellness needs of mine, like self-care, in order to, get straight A's or be on the dean's list all the time, always. And while those are really awesome things, sometimes the lengths I was going to achieve that meant way too many all-nighters and, cutting out time with friends and family. So like my social circle and my social wellness was suffering. My physical wellness was suffering. My mental wellness was suffering. My inner critic, the volume was like really loud to the point where I couldn't even enjoy the success that I was feeling. And I had to look at what is success to me and how do I define that? And does that align with my true values? And so I had to kind of look at that, and it does align with my true values to work towards the things I want to do, but also showing up for myself and respecting myself is also a true value at my core. So I had to kind of figure that out and tease that out a little bit and find something that worked for me. And it's kind of like, why do I feel this is important, right? What's driving that? What's the motivation behind that? Is it societal pressure, or maybe pressure from my family to be that high achiever go-getter all the time? Or is it important to me because, the way I want to further my academics to do what I want to do in life? And so I really keep that in mind when I'm setting goals. And is there some sense of pressure? So I just did kind of talk about that, but where is that coming from, right? And what's the inner narrative? So for me, a lot of the time, my inner narrative around school and my GPA was that if it's not insert number here, you're a failure. So I had to really look at that and redefine that and reframe that and create a more self-compassionate inner narrative, right? And so using that example we talked about before, right? Like if my best friend said to me, if my GPA is not 4.0, I'm a failure. I probably would have given her a really long-winded explanation of how that's not true and how amazing and smart she is. So I started trying to practice that for myself. And it was really weird and uncomfortable, but after a while I started believing that, and I was able to internalize that and kind of integrate that into my own belief system for myself. So that's kind of an example. I don't know if you have any examples or comments or things to add that are important to Cara before we go to the next slide.
I think we can go to the next slide, but I will say, just like yourself, I think I've been definitely a victim of like self-criticism, quite like persistent self-criticism for a long time. And, I just think, yeah, I can definitely really relate to a lot of the ways that I've compromised a lot of my own wellness towards a goal. And yeah.
Okay, this is not my year to run a marathon. So I found this poem. Well, it's not really I guess it kind of is. It's an article. And I found it a few years ago. And it was written by a single mother. And so I've kind of adapted it here to suit more of the population. But it is an actual article that's referenced at the end of this presentation. And I just found that with everything that's gone on lately for so many of us with, our pandemic and with a lot of us navigating unprecedented times right now and extra pressures and extra stresses that comes with that, I found that this is a really relevant article, and it really does tie into the whole New Year, More Me philosophy. So yeah, another year of resolutions to somehow better or fix ourselves and transform ourselves and suddenly be enough. And usually I'm right there with them with a 5-mile long list of things I want to change about myself. But this year I can't, and I'm laying it out there. The truth is I'm in the weeds. I'm in the when will I sleep like a normal human weeds. I'm in the hard feelings to feel weeds. I'm knee deep in the deadline, screen time, help stuff, bills, and repetitive meals. This is not my year to run a marathon or drink 2 gallons of water every day or make home-cooked organic meals every night or fit into those size 2 small skinny jeans I bought last year. This is my year to survive. The reality is I don't need a me who looks like a fitness model in leggings right now or who makes individual quiches for all of my coworkers. Sorry, I'm laughing because Chelsea mentioned that she made some quiches last night. So good on you, Chelsea.
I sure did.
Yeah. I need a me who will love me well, imperfections and all. So this year, if you need to, and spoiler alert, you'll almost definitely do, give yourself some grace. Some years aren't meant to be record breaking and some years are meant to survive. And so I really love this poem because, you know, a lot of times the societal construct around resolutions, like we've mentioned several times now, is, you know, no excuses, no limits, must achieve. And so if you're feeling like maybe, you know, you notice some areas in your life where your inner critic is really strong that way, like this is your permission to give yourself some slack because it's been a bit of a go for all of us. So, yeah.
All right, this is me again. All right, so now that we've kind of talked about the self-compassion and the history and everything, we're going to look at some kind of practical mindsets and goals to move forward in the way that we approach goals and resolutions and everything. So has anybody heard of SMART goals? You can just type a yes or no in the chat. Yes. All right. So SMART goals are SMART, and it stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So when I break down some of those concepts, I don't think all of those really invite us to have self-compassion. When we look at the specific part, I think that humans by nature aren't specific. You know, our goals are changing. Our goals should be flexible as, you know, we change and the world changes around us. So I just don't think that's always a realistic standard. Same with achievable. I think it makes us question what is achievable. You know, have we, you know, met this really structured, like specific goal? And I think, yeah, sometimes that's a lot of pressure and timely. I mean, things happen when they should and they flow as they should. And, you know, realistic. Once again, I think we're always changing and our motivations change. So yeah, so PACT is an alternative to the SMART goals that we're often given. So PACT stands for purposeful, actionable, continuous, and trackable. So purposeful. Your goal should be a purposeful effort means of using your internal passions and your inner why to work towards things that will bring you meaning and fulfillment in life. Actionable is taking small actions today to avoid feeling overwhelmed and avoid over planning in the future. And this kind of concept originates from mindfulness. Then there's continuous, so an ongoing routine that can be shifted over time. So there's that allowing ourselves to be flexible and not super hard on ourselves. But this remains consistent. So this helps avoid paralysis of choice or FOMO. And Jessica, I don't know if you want to speak to that concept a little bit more. I think you know more about that than I do.
Sure. So an ongoing routine that can be shifted over time. So but it does remain consistent, right? So it's not like, oh, you know, I need a break, so I'm giving up. It's okay, you know, I'm gonna keep going in this direction, but I might just like decrease the speed, or I might, you know, do something that's a little more adaptable, right? And sometimes with continuous, we'll start something, and then with all of those bombarding messages, we will start thinking like, but maybe that's what I should do, right? And that happens all the time with advertising. And so people end up not knowing what to pick, so they just don't pick, right? And that's paralysis of choice, right? There's too many options. We don't know where to start, so we don't. And then FOMO is that like constant switching. and being at ground zero, and then like, oh, but what about that over there, and switching to this instead, and switching to this instead, but we're not really moving towards what we want to be moving towards, with that fear of missing out, like fear of this option might be better, can kind of keep us stuck sometimes. So that's what continuous kind of refers to.
Yeah. And then the last one is trackable. So differing from measurable, and I think that measurable piece really ties into how we measure success, right? Instead, trackable. So trackable refers to building up to a specific goal and doing it slowly rather than jumping into feet from zero to maintain or to a maximum effort and continuously working towards. You can kind of track and you can see how you're making some steps, but you don't need to necessarily be reaching this concrete step at this certain point in time. So yeah, I don't know if you have anything else you want to say about PACT.
I think sometimes with some of these kinds of concepts that are kind of, on the back burner, because SMART goals can be really useful, right? We're not saying that SMART goals are never the answer. There are a lot of pros about SMART goals, but just sometimes it depends on what kind of goal you're setting, right? It's good to have options that do sometimes allow for a little more self-compassion, because some things are a lot harder to change than other things, right? So we can provide like some examples. So a common resolution is I want to be more active, right? And so setting a SMART goal might be that jumping in with 2 feet, right? Like specific, if in a SMART goal, it might look something along the lines of, I'm gonna insert a length amount of time, exercise, like 30 minutes of exercise every morning at 9 a.m. during the week.
It's like, I'm going to maintain this for the next 3 months and I'm going to achieve this body by the end of it.
Yeah, and so, just like the specific alone, like that might always be practical or doable, right? Like it's, if we wake up one morning and we had like a really rough sleep and we're kind of sore, and like if you're like me and sometimes you fall off the bed and like you wake up in pretzel shapes, like you don't really want to wake up and, okay, it's 9 a.m. so I better go for like a 30-minute run, right? It's like, I'm going to give myself some time to stretch, or maybe I'll wait till later in the day. And that allows for kind of like the purposeful to step in, right? Like you're aligned with your inner why, like, well, it's important to me and to be active and nurture my physical wellness, but I'm also going to like do that in a way that is meaningful and fulfilling for me, right? So adapting what you're doing might feel a little more fulfilling rather than punishing, and kind of nurtures the self-compassion rather than like the self-punishing, self-discipline kind of piece. Actionable, like small actions to avoid feeling overwhelmed, right? Like usually with SMART goals, it's like there'll be a big goal and we'll try and break it down, but actual is kind of similar and like a variant of that. This is kind of like a different wording choice. Continuous, it does kind of help you stay consistent along those lines. And then trackable, a great example of trackable would be for the same example, right? Like specific in a SMART goal, like I'm going to move for 30 minutes of, 30-minute run every morning. And trackable might be like, I'm going to start with a 10-minute walk in the morning. I'm going to go to a 15-minute walk. I'm going to go from a 15-minute walk to a 15-minute power walk. I'm going to go to a 15-minute brisk jog, right? So you can kind of track your progress and build your way up to it slowly, which kind of does prevent like the burnout feeling, right? When we can ease into it with a little bit more grace for ourselves rather than just like riding solely on grit. So
And so we have a comment from Hannah here. I also love this. I'm the worst at routines and specific goals. If I set a specific goal, I'm most guaranteed not to do it. If I set flexible goals, I am way more likely to do them because I have more choice in how and what I will do to achieve my goals. I think SMART goals work for a certain type of person, but not everyone. I think that's a really great comment, and I think that really connects to what Jessica was saying before about the study, how actually when people stride towards things with more self-compassion, often they're more attainable.
Yeah, like, I love that, Hannah. Thank you for sharing that. And for me, I find the biggest difference between the two is that the packed goals really incorporate like your inner why, right? And so riding on your inner why to carry you through in those moments where you feel like really unmotivated and really down and really it kind of allows you to find within yourself like why you're doing this and from a place of value and meaning rather than, and it's an internal thing rather than SMART goals. I personally have found I made this commitment and the outside world like this is how I'm defining success out there for me personally, because it specifically incorporates that inner why. That makes a really big difference for me between the two. Okay, so 5 to Thrive. So principles from a researcher and expert in the field of eating disorders, actually, that can be used in any variant of a goal. And so they're from Carolyn Costin. And the 5 to Thrive are 5 principles that you can use when you're trying to make any kind of a change for any reason, for any length amount of time. And it really does help kind of shift towards more self-compassion and self-worth. So the first one is experiment. And like we kind of talked about with the Center for Clinical Interventions, compassion versus criticism experiment, those can be really useful, right? So when we first start trying to make some kind of a change, just treating it like you're just going to see what happens, right? Kind of takes the fear of like a huge commitment that we might not be able to live up to and the narratives we have tied to that out of the equation. If we just like, let's just see what happens. Let's just kind of tweak some things around and see what happens. And so it kind of allows you to approach it right off the hop with more of like a growth mindset. Like I'm just going to see. It's kind of a more inviting experience. Curiosity, practicing the art of contemplation and mindfulness to gain further introspection onto yourself and what's going on for you, like your behavioral patterns. So when you start making a change and you are kind of noticing like, I really felt like I wanted to do this for myself today, but my thoughts were kind of saying this and I talked myself out of it. And then getting curious on like, where did those thoughts come from? Why did they come up? When did they come up? Is there kind of like a relationship between those two things? Kind of lets you go a little deeper into your personal patterns, which is kind of cool. Permission. So that's really important. Just like allow yourself some grace and give yourself a break, right? That's the compassion comes in there big time with permission. So it's like, you know what? I woke up this morning and I was super motivated and I felt like, yep, today's my day to go for a 30-minute run tonight. But I've been sitting in front of a screen all day and I'm really exhausted, didn't have the best sleep. Maybe like some things have come up along the way in the day, like got a headache. So instead, I'm going to give myself a break and I'm going to, go for a little bit of a walk instead. So I still get that fresh air, but I'm not going to push myself to run when I'm not feeling up to it. Like the permission to do that, and then non-judgment to do so without judgment. Right. So, noticing and releasing that inner critic in your mind that's like, you should go for a run because you said you would. When we start shoulding on ourselves, that's like opening the door for the inner critic, right? So like, come on in. So non-judgment is kind of like the no thanks to the inner critic. Compassion, holding space for our experiences, trying to practice loving kindness with ourselves and with others. So the self-compassion piece for sure. And then also compassion for others, right? I feel like that's important to mention too when we're talking about all of this, right? We have people in our lives that, you know, just like we're subject to resolution burnout and all of these messages from the media and stuff. And like certainly people in our lives are as well. So not ever tolerating like the disrespect or anything like that. But if we, you know, if we have some boundaries that allow for like two-way compassion, and if we notice that somebody in our lives has been like, maybe, you know, maybe they're falling into that trap and they've been a little bit prickly or they're seeming a little worn down, just extending some loving kindness with them and some patience and maybe offering an ear. Yeah. I don't know if you have any comments too, Takara, but.
No, I think you said that all beautifully. I think I learned a lot today from you. I really like the experiment one. I think a lot of the times, every time I make a new goal or want to reach something or think about what I should be, I have a really concrete idea of what it should look like. So I really like just going into it and seeing what happens.
Yeah. And it kind of keeps the fun in it too, I've found with the project, like the experiment piece. Kind of keeps that like sense of adventure, right?
For sure.
So
because it should be fun. Yeah,
that can be a really like important component too. I know we didn't make any specific points about fun.
I
and
just
like
thought of that.
Yeah, and a sense of adventure. But like if we can keep things fun, like they're more apt to pull us in, right? So
For sure.
while that inner why can push us in those more challenging moments, and for the right reasons, for the meaningful reasons, but like having some pull is really important too. So keeping things fun, definitely. Okay, so wrapping up today. So thank you everyone so much for joining us. And you can feel free, we like to, when we cover stuff today, because, you know, anything and everything can bring stuff up in us, right? And we do some reflecting when we take the time to acknowledge certain concepts and things that are happening. So we always like to wrap up with some ideas on how you can maybe practice some self-care, moving towards that self-compassion today. You can totally feel free to unmute yourself or pop them into the chat. And same thing if you have any questions. And just a little reminder to just be gentle with yourselves on this journey.
I'll comment. So first of all, thank you so much, Jessica and Takara, for that amazing presentation. I really loved everything that was said. It was so informative. It was like, these are all such important concepts that we should be talking about more, and I don't think we do enough. So thank you so much for that great presentation. I just wanted to ask if you guys have heard of like the stages of change model. So I'll just like put a link to like some information on it in the chat right now because I was just Googling it. But everything that was kind of talked about got me thinking about this model because it's, you know, talks about how like you have to be, you know, there are certain stages that you can be in order to change behavior, make changes to your life. And if you're not in kind of the stage of actually making that change happen, then it's not going to. And I think with all of the like the resolution burnout that you guys are talking about, like that's what happens all the time is New Year's comes and the world's like, hey, you need to be changing yourself, and nobody's ready for that, right? It's just this pressure to do something that you're not ready for. And I think, yeah, practicing good self-compassion can look like just understanding that it's okay to not ever be in the stage of actually making any changes. You can be in pre-contemplation for the rest of your life, and that's okay. But yeah, I just wanted to like bring that up because I kept thinking about it the whole time.
Thank you. And I think that is really cool. And I think we're learning all the time, but I think in an almost more powerful way, I think we're unlearning a lot of things that we've been kind of conditioned to learn to navigate life and navigate ourselves. And I think at the end of the day, we're human, and our journeys are all going to be super unique. And I think the best thing we can do is just to be kind to ourselves along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up, Hannah. I am familiar with the stages of change, and totally, you said it so well, right? I think a lot of the time, it's the sneakiness of it's the sneakiness of ways that advertising and marketing happen a lot. I find is, someone might be in pre-contemplation and they get that really abrupt push into contemplation, or someone might be in contemplation for some points and maybe even pre-contemplation for others, and there's that really abrupt push, and all of a sudden it's like boom, action, and they haven't ebbed through the phases. And yeah, that can be really challenging and really damaging in ways. So I'm really grateful you brought that up, and thanks so much for linking that in the chat. I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you, Hannah. I guess for the end, we'll give some more time if anybody wants to pop any comments or questions in the chat. But I just want to invite everybody to maybe write in the chat one way today or this week or whenever that you're going to do something kind for yourself. I'll offer myself first. I have a long day today, and at the end of it, I'm going to have a bubble bath. So yeah, that's yeah, and I have assignments to do. I've got loads of them, but I'm gonna be really exhausted after this long day, and I just want to give myself permission to not do it, and just take a moment to relax and do something nice for myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for myself, I have a lot of screen time today as well. So after this, I'm going to be hopping off and going for a little bit of a walk to get looks really nice and sunny outside. So I'm loving that. I'm probably going to go get a little bit of a walk and probably finish my nice little vitamin water thingy here, and just take a few minutes away from my screen. Really makes a big difference. And then I'm looking forward to this evening. My best friend and I are going to go, we're gym buddies, so we're going to go and move our bodies a little bit and just do some mindful movement. And that always feels really nice after like sitting in the computer chair for a long time. So yeah,
For sure.
Looking forward to that for sure.
Awesome. Well, that sounds really nice.
Mm-hmm.
Hannah said that they bought these ice cream filled mochi balls. I'm obsessed with mochi balls. I love green tea mochi balls. So you're gonna have some after dinner, and oh, sorry, I almost swore. That's awesome.
And I don't
Chelsea.
know if oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think I'm gonna go for a walk too, because I just like I don't know, like today I'm just like at a loss to like find things to do for like self-care. Like this just never happens to me, so I guess like I gotta just practice more mindfulness.
You two are so brave. It's so cold outside, so dress super warm.
Oh yeah, bundling up, but and then also too, I am noticing that so sorry, some of our resources need updating, but there are some on here. A lot of them are still valid, but all of these on-campus resources and off-campus resources are, you can access them through our live chat. If you're ever wondering where to turn and you're looking for some extra support, definitely check in with our ambassadors. They're on the live chat. They're waiting and ready and super excited for people to tune in. And you can take a picture of these, just being mindful that I know you can always, of course, for the Wellness Center, email our coordinator, Chelsea. She's amazing. But we do also have the live chat, and the instructions on how to access that are on our social media for Facebook and Instagram. And I do believe also our mental health, Kamloops Mental Health for off-campus resources, the number recently did change. So I so apologize for that. We'll make sure that our number is updated.
I just added them in the chat, Jessica. You probably can't see. So I added the mental health number, which is in the interior health. So if you live within interior health, you can just phone 310 MHSU, so for mental health and substance use, and they will connect you with the local agency you should be connecting with. And also I put the link to the live chat. It's on our Wellness Center website for anyone who's curious. If you just go to our main page, you can access it there.
Thank you so much. I can't see the chat, so super grateful.
Well, yay. Well, I had a really great time presenting today. It's always the biggest joy ever. I, on purpose, try and do something every semester with Jessica because it's just so great to work with you. And I always learn so much. And even today, as a presenter, I took some really great things away. And I'm super, super grateful for everybody's participation in the comments. Yeah, today was a lot of fun. And thank you for coming, everyone.
Yeah,
Great work, team.
Everyone.
Thank you to Cara and Jessica. Never disappoint. Thank you for the content. Thank you to our other leaders who have shown up to support our team. I know we've all learned from both of you today as well. So congratulations on a very good presentation. Thank you, everybody.